San Antonio, Texas, September 1971. 110 degrees in the shade. Jack Brennan was under a Cessna
Yes, sir.
172 when he heard the voice. His back hurt. His knees hurt. Everything hurt when you were 65 and you spent your days on concrete floors fixing other people's airplanes. The wrench slipped in his oil-stained hands as he tried to loosen a bolt that had probably been over-tightened by some weekend pilot who thought he knew what he was doing. Then the voice came from the hangar door. "Mr. Brennan, son," Jack froze. Nobody had called him Mr. Brennan in 30 years. In San Antonio, Texas, you were either Jack or you were nothing. And that accent, he knew that accent. He had heard it on radio broadcasts during the war, clipped, formal, Japanese. "My name is Hiroshi Yamada. I flew Zero fighter in war." The wrench fell from Jack's hand. It hit the concrete with a sound like a gunshot. His heart was pounding. For a moment, he was back in 1942, listening to the radio, hearing about Pearl Harbor, about the Philippines, about Java, about the Dutch boys he had trained, about the telegram that came 3 months later. "I shot down your students in Java. I come to apologize." Jack rolled out from under the Cessna. His hands found the concrete. Pushed. His body protested, but he made it to his feet. The figure in the doorway was small, maybe 5'6", wearing a cheap gray suit that looked wrong in the Texas heat, holding a wooden box in both hands like it was something sacred. The sunlight behind the man made him a silhouette, but Jack could see his face now, weathered, lined, about the same age as Jack. Eyes that had seen things, eyes that carried weight. "How did you find me?" The Japanese man bowed, deep, the kind of bow that meant something. "I have been looking for 12 years. Jack's hand moved to his hip. Old instinct. There was no gun there. Hadn't been one there since 1945. But the instinct remained. "I killed 3 men who flew the CW-21, the man said. His English was good, but careful. Each word chosen. "The plane you taught them to fly. I come to bring their spirits rest." Jack Brennan stared at this man, this enemy, this ghost from a war that ended 26 years ago but never really ended at all. And 30 years collapsed into a single moment. The smell of engine oil mixed with the smell of mesquite smoke from a barbecue place down the road. A truck drove past on the highway. Somewhere a dog was barking. "You better come inside," Jack said. But before we can understand why a former Japanese ace pilot would travel 6,000 miles to apologize to an American test pilot, we need to go back. Back to 1938. Back to a fighter plane so advanced that it terrified the military. So fast that the Japanese stole its secrets. So deadly that it killed the men who flew it. This is the story of the Curtiss Wright CW-21. The Americans called it the Demon, but the name was invented by journalists after the war. The men who flew it in combat never called it that. They called it what it was: a beautiful machine, a perfect killer, a racehorse sent to plow fields. And this is the story of 2 men, an American who built the future, and a Japanese pilot who learned from it, who killed with it, and who spent 30 years trying to find forgiveness. 1938. America builds the world's fastest fighter. The numbers were staggering. Top speed of 315 miles per hour. Climb rate of 4,800 feet per minute. Service ceiling of 28,000 feet. It could reach 20,000 feet in under 6 minutes. The Zero, which would dominate the Pacific 3 years later, would take 9. It was 15 miles per hour faster than anything in the American inventory. It could outdive every fighter in the world. Its rate of climb was so extreme that test pilots reported tunnel vision from the G-forces. 1940. The Army rejects it. Too dangerous, they said. No armor plating to protect the pilot. No self-sealing fuel tanks. No structural reinforcement to absorb battle damage. One good hit and it would fold like paper. The Army wanted flying tanks. Curtiss Wright built a fighter, 1941. Japan attacks. America has no interceptors. The P-40 Warhawk was too slow. The P-39 Airacobra was a disaster. The Brewster Buffalo was a death trap. The CW-21, rejected and forgotten, was shipped to the Dutch East Indies. 24 aircraft, 24 Dutch boys barely out of flight school, facing the most experienced naval fighter pilots in the world. 1942, the rejected fighter fights alone and loses. In 2 weeks of combat, 16 Dutch pilots were killed. The CW-21s were destroyed. shot down, captured, burned on runways to keep them from Japanese hands. The plane that could have changed the war never got the chance, and the Japanese studied it, measured it, learned from it, and used those lessons to refine the Zero that would dominate the Pacific for the next 2 years. St. Louis, Missouri, September 1938. The Curtiss Wright factory sat on the edge of Lambert Field. It was a sprawling complex of hangars and workshops and assembly lines where the company built the trainers and transports that kept them alive through the Depression. In a corner office that smelled like cigarette smoke and old coffee, Daniel Garrison sat with a rejection letter on his desk. It was from the War Department. It was the 7th rejection letter in 3 years. He was 50 years old. His company was barely profitable. His wife had left him in 1936. The bottle of whiskey in his desk drawer was half empty, and it was only 10 in the morning. On the wall behind him was a framed photograph. The Curtiss Hawk, the fighter that made him famous in 1932. Now obsolete, outclassed by everything the Europeans were building. America was falling behind, and nobody seemed to care. Daniel Garrison was an engineer. He understood physics, weight and power and drag and lift. And he understood something else. War was coming. He could feel it the way you feel a storm building. Europe was rearming, Japan was aggressive, and America was flying biplanes. He needed one more chance, one more design. Something so fast, so advanced that even the hidebound idiots in the War Department would have to notice. He pressed the button on his desk intercom. Send Marcus Webb in. Marcus Webb was 32 years old, thin, nervous energy, brilliant in the way that made other engineers uncomfortable. He walked into Garrison's office carrying blueprints that were already worn from being rolled and unrolled 100 times. Show me the numbers again, Garrison said. Webb spread the blueprints across the desk. The CW-21 design, all metal construction, low-wing monoplane, retractable landing gear. But the numbers were what mattered. Empty weight 300 pounds. The Hurricane weighs 6,600. The new Messerschmitt is 5,500. Garrison lit a cigarette. Engine Wright Cyclone R1820, 1,000 horsepower. Jesus Christ, that's a bomber engine. In a fighter airframe, power-to-weight ratio of 0.32, nothing in the world comes close. Climb rate, 4,800 feet per minute at sea level. Garrison exhaled smoke slowly, thinking, calculating. The Army will say it's a death trap. Webb nodded. No armor, no self-sealing tanks. One hit to the fuel system, and it's over. So we're betting that speed is armor. We're betting on the next war, not the last one. The Japanese are building fighters on the same principle. Light, fast, maneuverable. If war comes in the Pacific, the side with the faster climbers will control the air. Garrison stubbed out his cigarette. He looked at the blueprints, then at the rejection letter, then back at Webb. Build it, he said. The board won't approve it, not without a contract. Build it anyway, on our dime. If we're right, we change aviation history. Webb hesitated, and if we're wrong, Garrison didn't answer. They both knew what happened to aircraft companies that bet everything on the wrong design. There were a dozen dead manufacturers that proved the point. I need a test pilot, Garrison said. Someone who won't quit when it gets scary. Jack Brennan. Is he still drinking? Not during flight hours. That's not what I asked. Webb met his eyes. He's the best we have, and he believes in it. He saw the preliminary design 6 months ago. He wants to fly it. Then tell him it's his first flight in 3 months. Jack Brennan was 32 years old in the autumn of 1938. He had been flying since he was 17. Barnstorming, air races, crop dusting, any job that kept him in the air and paid enough for gas and whiskey. He joined Curtiss Wright in 1932 when the Depression killed the air race circuit and he needed steady work. He had survived 4 crashes, 2 engine failures, 1 mid-air collision that killed his wingman but somehow left Jack alive with a broken arm and a concussion. He had a wife named Sarah who worried about him, a 7-year-old son named James who didn't know his father very well because Jack was always at the factory or the airfield or the bar. He was good at his job, maybe the best test pilot Curtiss Wright had, but he was also reckless in the way that test pilots often are. That combination of skill and fatalism that lets you push an untested aircraft to its limits because you don't quite believe you can die. When Marcus Webb told him about the CW-21, Jack's first response was to laugh. You want to put a 1,000-horsepower engine in a 3,000-pound airframe? 3,100. That's suicide. Or it's the future. They were standing in the experimental hangar. Late evening, most of the workers had gone home. The prototype was taking shape behind them. Aluminum ribs and stringers, the engine already mounted. It looked like a sculpture, like something that belonged in a museum, not a combat zone. Jack walked around it slowly, touching the fuselage, feeling the thinness of the aluminum skin. No armor meant weight savings. It also meant vulnerability. One burst of machine gun fire, and this thing would come apart. The Army rejected it, Webb said. I heard. They said it's too fragile, can't take battle damage. They're probably right. So why do you want to fly it? Jack was quiet for a long moment, looking at the aircraft. Then he turned to Webb. Because it's honest, he said. Everything else we build is compromise. Heavier than it should be. Slower than it could be. We add armor and fuel capacity and radios and guns until the thing barely flies. This, he gestured at the prototype. This is pure speed, climb, maneuverability. If you get hit, you die. So don't get hit. That's the philosophy. It's the right philosophy for the next war. The Europeans learned it in Spain. The Japanese learned it in China. Light fighters with trained pilots beat heavy bombers every time. We're just late figuring it out. Webb smiled. It was the smile of an engineer who had found someone who understood. First flight in 2 weeks. I'll be ready. September 22nd, 1938. The day everything changed. The test range was 10 miles outside St. Louis. Open farmland, long grass, a dirt strip that had been graded smooth. Perfect autumn weather, clear skies, light wind from the west. The prototype sat at the end of the runway. Sarah Brennan stood next to Marcus Webb. She was 28, blonde, wearing a blue dress that moved in the wind. She had driven out to watch, even though she hated watching her husband fly. Even though every test flight felt like a preview of the day she would get the telegram. Jack was in the cockpit running through the checklist. The right cyclone engine was idling, a deep rumble that you felt in your chest. The three-bladed propeller was spinning slowly, sunlight flashing through the arc. He checked the controls. Stick, rudder, throttle. Everything responded. The cockpit was tight, cramped, just enough room for one pilot and his instruments. The canopy was open, wind rushing past. He looked over at Webb, gave a thumbs up. Then he pushed the throttle forward. The engine roar became a scream. 1,000 horsepower pulling a 300-pound aircraft. The acceleration was violent, sudden. The tail lifted. The runway blurred. 60 miles per hour in 3 seconds. 80. The wheels left the ground and the CW-21 was flying. Jack pulled the stick back. The world tilted vertical. The G-forces crushed him into the seat. His vision narrowed. Gray edges closing in. The altimeter was spinning. 1,000 feet, 2,000, 3,000. His breathing was labored, legs cramping. But he kept the stick back and the engine at full power, and the plane climbed like it was trying to escape gravity itself. At 5,000 feet, he rolled inverted. The earth spun above him, blue sky below. For a moment, he was weightless, free. Then he rolled back level and laughed. The radio crackled. Jack, what are you doing? Testing limits. That wasn't in the flight plan. Plans change. He leveled off at 8,000 feet, throttle back, let the engine cool. The speed bled off to cruise, around 280 miles per hour. He had never flown anything this fast that felt this light. The controls were responsive, almost too responsive. Every input translated immediately to movement. No lag, no mushiness. It was like flying a fighter plane should be. Pure connection between pilot and machine. He tried some basic maneuvers, rolls, loops, steep turns. Everything worked. Everything felt right. The aircraft was stable, predictable. The engine ran smooth, no vibration, no overheating. The climb performance was extraordinary. The dive performance was even better. He pushed the nose down and watched the airspeed indicator climb past 300, past 320. The airframe started shaking slightly, but it held together. Then he pulled back into a climb and the shaking stopped. "I'm coming in," he radioed. The landing was where things went wrong. He came in fast. Too fast. Old habits from heavier aircraft. The wheels touched down at 90 miles per hour. The landing gear compressed. Hard. The airframe flexed. And somewhere in the tail section something cracked. It was a small sound, a tiny snap that nobody heard except maybe Jack. The aircraft rolled out, slowed, stopped. Everything looked fine. But Marcus Webb saw it when Jack climbed out. A stress fracture in the tail, where the vertical stabilizer joined the fuselage. Hairline, almost invisible. But it was there. Webb made a note in his logbook. First flight successful. 315 miles per hour top speed. Climb rate exceeds all expectations. But tail section showed structural weakness under hard landing. Must reinforce before production. He showed the log entry to Daniel Garrison that evening. Garrison read it twice. Then he made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Don't put it in the official report. If we tell the Army about a structural weakness, they'll use it as an excuse to kill the program. We fix it quietly, reinforce the tail, make it stronger, but we don't tell them it was ever a problem. That's lying. That's survival. We need to prove this design works in combat with real enemies. Then we fix the problems and sell it to the Army. Webb wanted to argue, but he also wanted to keep his job, to keep the program alive, so he nodded. And that lie, that small omission, would help kill 16 Dutch boys 4 years later in Java. November 1938, the China Gambit. The Chinese nationalist government was desperate. The Japanese had been bombing their cities for over a year. Shanghai had fallen. Nanjing had fallen. The provisional capital at Chongqing was hit almost daily by Japanese bombers flying from occupied airfields. The Chinese Air Force was equipped with obsolete biplanes and a handful of Soviet Il-15 and I-16 fighters. They were outgunned, outclassed, losing pilots faster than they could train replacements. They needed modern fighters. And Curtiss Wright needed to prove the CW-21 worked in combat. The deal was made quietly, no official contract, no government approval, just a private agreement between the company and the Chinese Purchasing Commission. Curtiss Wright would send the prototype to China. Chinese mechanics would assemble it. An American pilot would train Chinese pilots and demonstrate it in combat. The pilot was Jack Brennan. Sarah was pregnant when he told her. "You're going to China for 3 months, maybe 4. While I'm pregnant, the company is paying triple my normal salary. We need the money. We need you here." He didn't have a good answer for that. The truth was, he wanted to go, wanted to prove the aircraft in combat, wanted to be part of something bigger than test flights over Missouri farmland. But he couldn't say that to his wife. "I'll be back before the baby comes," he said. It was another lie. He was getting good at those. Chongqing, China, March 1939. The city was a nightmare. Craters everywhere from Japanese bombing raids. Buildings reduced to rubble. Civilians living in caves dug into the hillsides. Air raid sirens sounding 3 or 4 times a day. The smell of smoke and death that never quite went away. Jack arrived with the crated CW-21 on a cargo ship that came up the Yangtze River. The plane was disassembled, packed in wooden crates, stenciled with meaningless shipping labels to avoid Japanese attention. He was met at the dock by a young Chinese man wearing oil-stained coveralls and wire-rimmed glasses. "Mr. Brennan, I am Thomas Chen. I will assemble your aircraft." Thomas Chen was 26 years old. He had studied aviation mechanics at a technical school in Shanghai before the Japanese invasion. He had worked on Boeing P-26 fighters and old Curtiss biplanes, but he had never seen anything like the CW-21. They worked in a bombed-out hangar on the edge of the city. The roof was half collapsed. The walls were pockmarked with shrapnel holes. But it was shelter, and it had enough space. They worked 18-hour days, assembling the airframe, mounting the engine, installing the controls and instruments. Every few hours, the air raid sirens would sound, and they would take cover, crouching under the workbenches while Japanese bombers passed overhead, listening to the whistle of falling bombs and the crump of explosions. "Why do you do this?" Jack asked one night. They were drinking tea, jasmine tea that Chen had heated over a small camp stove, the first time Jack had ever tasted it. "Do what?" "Stay here, fight. You could leave. Go to America. Use your skills somewhere safe." Chen was quiet for a moment. Then he poured more tea into Jack's cup. "In China, we say this. A fine sword is tested in battle. Your plane is a sword, very fine, but not yet tested. I want to see if it is as good as you say. It's better. Then we will prove it." By late March, the aircraft was assembled. Chinese nationalist insignia painted on the wings. The blue and white roundel that marked it as friendly. The Curtiss Wright logo covered over. Officially, this was a captured Japanese aircraft being tested. Unofficially, everyone knew what it was. Jack took it up on March 28th for the first flight over Chongqing. The engine started perfectly. The controls responded perfectly. He climbed to 10,000 feet in less than 4 minutes. Chinese pilots on the ground watching through binoculars couldn't believe what they were seeing. A fighter that climbed that fast could intercept bombers before they reached their targets, could get above them, dive on them with speed advantage. It was exactly what they needed. The next day, Jack flew 3 more test flights, getting familiar with the aircraft in the thin mountain air. The performance was even better at altitude. The engine ran strong, the handling was crisp. Then on April 3rd, the air raid siren sounded, and everything changed. April 3rd, 1939. Combat. The Japanese came at noon, 26 Fiat BR-20 bombers flying in formation at 18,000 feet. They had flown from occupied airfields in Wuhan. Their target was the industrial district of Chongqing. If they got through, hundreds of civilians would die. The Chinese scrambled everything they had. I-15 biplanes, I-16 fighters. But the bombers were already over the city by the time the interceptors reached altitude. Jack was in the CW-21, listening to the radio chatter. The Chinese pilots were trying, but they were too slow, too low. The bombers were already starting their attack run. He pushed the throttle to full power. The acceleration pressed him back into the seat. The altimeter spun. 1,000 feet per minute, 2,000, 3,000. The G-forces built. His vision started to tunnel, but he kept climbing. At 10,000 feet in 2 minutes, he was above the bomber formation. He rolled inverted, looked down, saw them below. Fat targets, slow, vulnerable. He rolled back, pointed the nose down, let gravity and the engine work together. The airspeed climbed past 300, past 320. The dive angle was steep, almost vertical. The bombers grew larger in his windscreen. He could see the pilots in the cockpits, see the bomb bay doors opening. At 2,000 feet, he pulled the trigger. The 250 caliber machine guns opened fire, tracers arcing across the sky. He walked the rounds into the bomber's right engine, saw hits, saw smoke. The engine caught fire. The bomber broke formation, started losing altitude. Jack pulled up hard. The G-forces crushed him. Gray tunnel closing in, but he held it, pulled through, climbed again. The bomber was going down, trailing black smoke. It made a forced landing in a rice paddy 10 miles from the city. The crew survived. They were captured by Chinese troops. Jack climbed back to altitude. But the other bombers had already dropped their loads and were turning for home. He didn't have enough fuel to chase them. He landed 20 minutes later. Thomas Chen was waiting at the edge of the runway, grinning, practically jumping. "You got one, I saw it." Jack climbed out of the cockpit. His hands were shaking. Adrenaline crash. He had been in danger before, but never in combat, never with someone actively trying to kill him. Chen inspected the aircraft. There were a few bullet holes in the wing. Light damage from return fire from the bomber's defensive guns. Nothing critical, but it proved the point. Even light hits could be dangerous in an aircraft this fragile. Jack sent a cable to St. Louis that night. 2 minutes to 10,000 feet. Intercepted formation. 1 confirmed kill. Aircraft performed beyond expectations. Taking light damage from return fire. Request technical advice on armor installation. The response came back 2 days later from Daniel Garrison. No armor. Weight penalty too severe. Use speed. Avoid return fire. Continue evaluation. Jack flew 6 more combat missions over the next 2 months, April and May 1939. Each time he proved the same thing. The CW-21 could climb faster than anything the Japanese had, could intercept bombers, could get kills. But it was also fragile, frighteningly fragile. A burst of machine gun fire that would barely scratch a P-40 could tear the CW-21 apart. The aluminum skin was too thin, the structure too light. Speed was armor only if you didn't get hit. And in June, during a landing after a combat mission, Jack hit the runway hard. Too fast, too much angle. The landing gear compressed. The tail section cracked. Not just a stress fracture this time, a complete structural failure. The plane slewed sideways. The tail wheel collapsed. The aircraft spun. Jack was thrown against the harness. The canopy cracked. The engine died. He climbed out shaking, unhurt. But the aircraft was finished. The tail section would need complete rebuilding. It would take months. Equipment they didn't have. Expertise that didn't exist in wartime China. Thomas Chen looked at the damage and shook his head. Cannot repair here. Too much structure broken. Jack sent another cable to St. Louis. Aircraft total loss. Structural failure tail section on landing. Same location as initial stress fracture. Design requires reinforcement before production. Combat evil successful, but aircraft cannot sustain hard landings or battle damage. Recommend immediate redesign tail structure. He waited 3 days for a response. When it came, it was from Marcus Webb. Not Garrison, acknowledged. Production models will incorporate tail reinforcement. Initial contract received from China for 3 aircraft. Additional export interest from Netherlands. Returns soonest for debrief. Jack read the cable twice. 3 aircraft for China, export interest from Netherlands. They were moving forward with production, based on his combat evaluation, based on his proof that the design worked. But they hadn't fixed the tail problem yet. They were just promising to fix it later. He thought about the stress fracture from the first flight, the crack that Marcus Webb had documented but never reported, the lie that Daniel Garrison had told to keep the program alive. And now they were going to build more of them, export them, put other pilots in cockpits of aircraft that would break under stress. Jack Brennan packed his bags. But before he left China, there was one more chapter. One more group of young men who would fly his beautiful, deadly machine. November 1940. Andir Airfield, Java. The Dutch East Indies were preparing for war. Everyone could feel it. Japan was expanding. The Philippines would be next. Then Java. The colonial government was scrambling to build defenses with equipment they didn't have and pilots they hadn't trained. 24 CW-21s had been delivered, crated, assembled by Indonesian mechanics who had never seen anything so modern. The Dutch Air Force needed someone to teach their pilots how to fly them. Curtis Wright sent Jack Brennan. He arrived in November. The heat was oppressive, humid, different from China's dry mountain air. The Dutch pilots waiting for him were young, most in their early 20s, fresh from flight school in Holland. They had flown trainers, biplanes, nothing like the CW-21. Their commander was Henrik van Doorn, 34 years old, career officer. He had escaped Holland just before the German invasion, left his wife and daughter behind. The guilt showed in his eyes. He shook Jack's hand with military precision. Mr. Brennan, we have 6 weeks. The Japanese could attack any time. Can you teach us? Jack looked at the row of CW-21s on the tarmac. Beautiful machines, gleaming in the tropical sun. He thought about the prototype that had broken in China, about the tail cracks, about the cables he had sent warning about structural weakness. He thought about lying, telling these Dutch boys their planes were invincible, but he couldn't do it. I can teach you to fly them, he said carefully, but you need to understand something. This aircraft is the fastest fighter in the world right now. Climb rate nothing can match. But it's fragile. The structure can't take battle damage. One good burst and it will come apart. Van Doorn's face didn't change. We know. We read the specifications. No armor, no self-sealing tanks. But it's what we have. Teach us to use it well. The training was intense. 6 weeks compressed into survival lessons. Jack taught them everything he had learned in China. The CW-21's strengths, its weaknesses, its quirks. Never dogfight. He told them again and again, never turn with a zero. The Japanese fighter is more maneuverable, but you're faster. Use that, boom and zoom, dive on them, hit them, climb away before they can respond. Speed is your only armor. Among the pilots was a young man named Peter Kramer, 23 years old, son of a rubber plantation owner. Born and raised in Java, he spoke Indonesian fluently, loved the island like it was part of his blood. Mr. Brennan, Kramer asked one evening, if we fly this plane perfectly, can we beat the Japanese? Jack wanted to say yes, wanted to give this eager young man confidence. But he had learned in China that lies get pilots killed. If you fly it perfectly, he said, and if you're lucky, and if the Japanese make mistakes, maybe. But Peter, understand this. War isn't about individual skill, it's about numbers. And the Japanese have more planes, more pilots, more experience. Your job isn't to win. Your job is to survive long enough to make them pay for every mile they take. Kramer nodded, serious now, understanding. On Jack's last day in Java, December 1940, the squadron gathered for a final briefing. Van Dorn thanked him. The pilots gave him a small gift, a wooden model of the CW-21 carved by one of the Indonesian mechanics. Jack gave them something in return, a photograph, himself standing next to the prototype in China, young, confident, one hand on the propeller blade. He turned it over and wrote on the back to the brave pilots of the CW-21. Fly fast, fly high. J. Brennan, test pilot. Keep this, he told them. Remember what this plane can do, and remember its limits. He shook each pilot's hand, wished them luck, hoped he would see them again after the war. He never did. 15 months later, most of them would be dead, shot down over Java in the beautiful, fragile fighters Jack had taught them to fly. And one of those photographs would be found in a captured cockpit by a Japanese ace named Hiroshi Yamada, who would carry it for 29 years, until he could return it to the man who signed it. But that day in December 1940, Jack Brennan didn't know any of this. He boarded a ship bound for San Francisco, went home to Texas, tried to forget about the war that was coming, and 6,000 miles away in Shanghai in a Japanese naval intelligence office, a young officer named Jiro Horikoshi was reading a report about the mysterious American fighter in Chongqing, taking notes, measuring, learning. The Zero was still on the drawing board, but its designers now had a template, proof that lightweight fighters could work, proof that speed could substitute for armor, proof that American engineers had been right about the future of aerial combat. They would copy those lessons, refine them, perfect them. And in 3 years, they would use that knowledge to build the most feared fighter of the Pacific War. All because Jack Brennan flew the perfect machine to China and proved it could kill. Kasumigara Naval Air Base, Japan, June 1941. The photograph arrived in a manila envelope marked secret. Lieutenant Commander Jiro Horikoshi opened it carefully. Inside were 3 intelligence photographs taken by a spy in Chongqing. They showed an aircraft, American, single engine, low-wing monoplane, sleek lines that spoke of speed. Horikoshi spread the photographs on his desk. He had been designing fighters for the Imperial Japanese Navy for 6 years. The Zero was his creation, his masterpiece. But it was still being refined, still being tested. And these photographs showed him that someone else had already solved the same problems he was wrestling with. The notes attached to the photographs gave specifications. Empty weight, 300 pounds. Engine output, 1,000 horsepower. Top speed, 315 miles per hour. Climb rate, 4,800 feet per minute. Horikoshi did the calculations in his head. Power to weight ratio, wing loading, thrust to drag, the numbers were extraordinary. This American aircraft was achieving performance that the Zero was still trying to reach. And it was doing it the same way. Lightweight construction. Powerful engine, no armor, no unnecessary equipment, speed and climb rate over protection and payload. He made notes in his engineering journal. Later, these notes would be incorporated into Zero design revisions. Small changes, refinements. But the philosophical confirmation was what mattered most. The Americans had proven that the lightweight fighter concept worked in combat. Horikoshi never met Jack Brennan, never knew his name. But the ripples from that test flight in Chongqing would spread across the Pacific and help create the weapon that would dominate the early years of the war. Captain Hiroshi Yamada was 28 years old in the summer of 1941. He had joined the Imperial Japanese Navy in 1935 when he was 22. His father was a school teacher in a small town outside Osaka. His mother sold vegetables in the market. They were not wealthy, they were not connected. But Hiroshi was smart and he tested well and the Navy needed pilots. He trained on biplanes first, then on the new Mitsubishi A-5M fighters. By 1940, he was flying the Zero, the most advanced fighter aircraft in the world, or so they told him. He had 4 kills over China, transport aircraft and obsolete fighters, nothing that tested his skills, nothing that felt like real combat. War was supposed to be glorious. That was what the officers said. Service to the emperor, honor in battle, death before dishonor. But Hiroshi kept a journal, and in his private writings, he was more honest. Each kill is a man with a family. I pray for their souls. I do not feel glory. I feel weight. In June, he was shown the intelligence photographs of the American fighter. His squadron commander gathered the pilots in the briefing room. The Americans have developed a new interceptor. Very fast, very high climb rate. Intelligence indicates it is based on the same design philosophy as our Zero. Lightweight, high performance, minimal protection. The commander paused. Let that sink in. This proves our approach is correct, but it also means that if we face these aircraft in combat, they will be dangerous. Do not underestimate American engineering. After the briefing, Hiroshi studied the photographs. He had a friend named Takeshi Saito, who had studied engineering at the University of Southern California before the war, before the politics made it impossible. Saito understood American thinking better than most Japanese officers. What do you think? Hiroshi asked him. Saito looked at the photographs for a long time. I think the Americans are braver than we give them credit for. To build a fighter with no armor, to trust completely in speed, that requires courage. Or foolishness. Maybe both. They were sitting in the barracks drinking sake. It was late evening. Through the window they could see Zeros lined up on the flight line. Beautiful aircraft, deadly aircraft, products of the same philosophy that had created the American fighter in the photographs. Saito, do you ever wonder if we are on the right side? It was a dangerous question, the kind that could get you reported, arrested, dishonored. But Saito was his closest friend. They had trained together, flown together, trusted each other with their lives. I wonder many things, Saito said quietly. I wonder why we are fighting China. I wonder why we need territory. I wonder if honor means what they tell us it means. You studied in America. Did you like it there? Very much. The people were kind. They loved flying as much as we do. I had friends, good friends, and now we will fight them. Hiroshi poured more sake. When it's soon, maybe months, the politicians talk about oil embargoes, about American interference, about our destiny, but I think it is already decided. Will we win? Saito looked at his friend. We will win the first battles. Our pilots are better trained, our aircraft are better, but America is vast, rich. They will build more aircraft than we can shoot down. They will train more pilots than we can kill. In the end, numbers win wars. Then why fight at all? Because we are told to, because we are pilots, because we have no choice. They finished the sake in silence. December 7th, 1941, the day the world changed. Hiroshi Yamada was not at Pearl Harbor. His squadron was assigned to the southern operations, the invasion of Southeast Asia, the Philippines, Malaya, the Dutch East Indies. He was in French Indochina when he heard about the attack. The radio reports were jubilant. Great victory. American Pacific Fleet destroyed. 8 battleships sunk or damaged. Hundreds of aircraft destroyed on the ground. But Hiroshi felt sick, not because he disagreed with the attack. He was a Japanese officer. He followed orders, but because he knew what it meant. Total war, no going back. America would never forgive this, would never stop until Japan was defeated. Saito found him that evening. We deploy tomorrow. Java. What is the target? Dutch air bases. Intelligence reports they have American fighters. The same design from China. Hiroshi looked up. The Curtiss. Yes, 24 aircraft, delivered 6 months ago, flown by Dutch colonial pilots. Are they good? The pilot's unknown, but the aircraft is good. We studied it, remember fast climb. Good speed. If the pilots know what they are doing, it will be a real fight. Hiroshi wrote in his journal that night. December 8, 1941. America is now the enemy. My heart is heavy. Saito says we will face the Curtiss fighters in Java. Strange fate. I will meet the ghost of a plane I admired. I hope the pilots flying them are not as skilled as the American who tested it in China. I hope they do not make me kill them. But hope was not a strategy, and hope would not save the Dutch boys who were waiting in Java with their beautiful, fragile, inadequate aircraft. January 1942. The invasion of Java. The briefing room was hot, humid, tropical air that made uniforms stick to skin. 40 pilots crowded into a space meant for 20. The squadron commander stood at the front with a map of Java. The Dutch have concentrated their fighter strength at two main bases, Surabaya in the east, Batavia in the west. Intelligence estimates 24 Curtiss CW-21 interceptors, also Buffalo fighters and some obsolete biplanes. He pointed to Surabaya on the map. Our first strike will target Surabaya. Objectives are to destroy aircraft on the ground and suppress their ability to interfere with our bomber operations. We will attack with 26 bombers and 12 Zero escorts. The commander looked directly at Hiroshi. Captain Yamada will lead the fighter escort. Yamada, select your wingman. Lieutenant Saito, sir. Approved. The Curtiss fighters have excellent climb rate. Do not engage in vertical maneuvering. Use our superior numbers and turning ability. Hit them fast. Hit them hard. Do not give them time to use their speed advantage. After the briefing, Hiroshi and Saito studied the intelligence reports on the CW-21, the specifications they already knew. But there were also notes from interrogations of captured Chinese mechanics, notes about structural weakness, about tail sections cracking under hard landings, about vulnerability to battle damage. It is a glass sword, Saito said. What? The Curtiss. It cuts well but shatters easily, like a glass sword. Hiroshi thought about that. A glass sword, beautiful, sharp, deadly, but fragile. One good strike and it breaks. Then we must strike well, he said. February 3rd, 1942. First blood. The formation took off at dawn. 26 bombers in neat rows, 12 Zeros providing escort. Hiroshi led the fighter element. Saito flew on his right wing. The ocean passed below, blue and empty and beautiful. At 18,000 feet, they crossed the coast of Java. Green jungle, rice paddies, small villages. And in the distance, Surabaya, industrial city, port, military base. The radio crackled, bogies climbing from Surabaya, multiple contacts. Hiroshi scanned the sky, saw them, small dots rising from the airfield, climbing fast, very fast, the CW-21s. All aircraft maintain formation. Fighters prepare to engage. The Dutch aircraft continued climbing. Hiroshi watched them through his gun sight, counted them, 12 fighters, even numbers. But they were below, still climbing. The Japanese had altitude advantage. Then something unexpected happened. The Dutch aircraft kept climbing, past 15,000 feet, past 16,000, past 17,000. Their rate of climb was extraordinary, faster than the Zero, faster than anything Hiroshi had seen. They are reaching our altitude, Saito warned. I see them. At 18,000 feet, the Dutch aircraft leveled off. Now they had equal altitude, equal energy. The advantage was gone. All fighters engage at will. Protect the bombers. Hiroshi rolled into a dive. Saito followed. The first Dutch fighter saw them coming, tried to turn, but the Zero turned inside him easily. Hiroshi got tone, fired. Tracers walking across the sky. Missed. The Dutch pilot dove, used his speed, pulled away. Hiroshi tried to follow, but the CW-21 was faster in the dive. Much faster. It opened distance effortlessly. Cannot catch him in a dive, Hiroshi reported. Use altitude. Make them climb to us. But the Dutch pilots were not cooperating. They dove on the bombers, made quick firing passes, then dove away before the Zeros could engage. Classic hit-and-run tactics, using their speed advantage. Hiroshi saw one Dutch fighter line up on a bomber, saw the tracers, saw hits on the bomber's engine, Smoke. The bomber broke formation, started losing altitude. Saito with me. We take that one. They dove together. The Dutch fighter saw them, broke off his attack, started to dive away, but this time Hiroshi anticipated, led the target, fired a long burst. Hits. The CW-21 seemed to explode, not from fire, not from fuel, just from the impact of bullets on thin aluminum. The wings separated from the fuselage, just tore away. The aircraft tumbled, pieces falling. Hiroshi pulled up, shocked. He had expected fire, expected smoke and struggle, but the aircraft had just disintegrated, like paper in wind. Saito, did you see? Yes, one burst. The structure failed. Over the radio, other pilots were reporting the same thing. The Curtiss fighters died easily. Too easily. A few good hits and they came apart, but they were also dangerous. Fast, climbing well, using their advantages. And the Dutch pilots were braver than expected. They kept attacking even as their numbers dwindled. The dogfight lasted 15 minutes. When it ended, 9 CW-21s were down. 3 bombers damaged. 0 Japanese fighters lost. Hiroshi landed at the forward base feeling sick. He had 1 confirmed kill, maybe 2. The second aircraft had been damaged by his fire, but he could not confirm it crashed. Saito had 2 kills, both confirmed. The other pilots were celebrating. Easy victory, light losses. Proof that Japanese training and aircraft were superior. But Hiroshi walked away from the celebration, found a quiet place, vomited. Saito found him there. You are ill. I killed a man in an aircraft that could not protect him. That is not combat. That is murder. They were the enemy. They were pilots, like us, flying machines their generals gave them, machines that could not keep them alive. Saito sat down next to his friend. They were quiet for a long time. In California, Saito said, I met a pilot, American. He told me that every pilot knows the risk, that we choose to fly even though we might die. Those Dutch pilots chose too. They chose to defend their homes. We chose to invade. It is not the same. Perhaps not, but the result is the same. Men die, we carry the weight. March 1942, the captured fighter. After Java fell, the Japanese captured 1 CW-21 intact. It had been abandoned on a runway during the retreat. The Dutch had tried to burn it, but the fire was put out before major damage occurred. The aircraft was transported to Singapore for technical evaluation. Hiroshi requested assignment to the inspection team. He wanted to understand, wanted to see up close the machine that haunted him. The fighter sat in a hangar in Singapore. Indonesian workers had cleaned it, repaired minor damage. It looked pristine, deadly, beautiful. Hiroshi walked around it slowly, ran his hand along the aluminum skin. So thin. He could feel how light it was, how fragile. The engineering was elegant. Every gram of excess weight removed. Every component optimized for performance. A Japanese engineer was taking measurements, recording data. What do you think? Hiroshi asked. The engineer looked up from his notes. It is remarkable. The power-to-weight ratio is extraordinary. The aerodynamics are very clean, but the structure is inadequate. No armor, fuel tanks with no protection. One hit in the right place and the pilot dies. But it flies well. Extremely well. We should test fly it, learn from it. Hiroshi opened the cockpit, looked inside. The seat was small, built for a smaller man than most Americans. The controls were simple, functional, no unnecessary equipment. And then he saw it, tucked into the sun visor, a small photograph, black and white, worn at the edges. He pulled it out carefully. The photograph showed a man standing next to an aircraft. This aircraft, the CW-21, but in China, different markings. The man was American, tall, dark hair, wearing a leather flight jacket. He was smiling, one hand on the propeller blade. Hiroshi turned the photograph over. On the back, handwritten in English, to the brave pilots of the CW-21, fly fast, fly high, J. Brennan test pilot. Hiroshi stared at the photograph for a long time. This was the man who had tested the aircraft in China, who had proven it worked, who had trained others to fly it. And now 3 of those trained pilots were dead. killed by Hiroshi's guns. He pocketed the photograph. That night he wrote in his journal, March 12, 1942, "Today I saw the Curtiss plane up close. I found a photo of the test pilot who flew it in China. His name is Brennan. He looks kind. I wonder if he knows what happened to his students. I wonder if he knows that we learned from his plane to build ours. In another life, we might have been friends. In this life, I killed the men he taught. This weight I will carry always." March 2, 1942. The final battle. There were only 4 CW-21s left. The Dutch had also received British Hurricane fighters, better armed, better protected, slower. The remaining Curtiss aircraft were assigned to escort duty. Hiroshi's squadron was tasked with covering the amphibious landings on Java's north coast. But Dutch bombers were attacking the landing craft. Zeros were scrambled to intercept. The Dutch sent everything they had: 4 CW-21s, 7 Buffaloes, 3 Hurricanes, against 20 Japanese Zeros. The mathematics were simple. The Dutch were going to lose. Hiroshi led his flight into the engagement. The sky was full of aircraft, turning, diving, climbing, tracers arcing, smoke trails, the chaos of combat. He saw a CW-21 making a high-speed pass on a Zero, saw the Zero take hits, saw it fall. First Japanese fighter loss of the day. Then he saw Saito, his wingman, his friend, chasing another CW-21. The Dutch pilot was good, using his speed, diving away. But Saito was better. He stayed with him, closed the distance. The CW-21 caught fire. The pilot bailed out. Hiroshi saw the parachute open, saw the man falling. His flight suit was burning. He was trying to beat out the flames as he fell. Saito pulled up, victorious. But he had committed the cardinal sin of fighter combat, target fixation. He had forgotten to check his 6. A buffalo was on his tail. Saito brake right, but Saito did not hear, or heard too late. The buffalo's guns opened fire. 50 caliber rounds tore into the Zero's thin skin, hit the fuel tank, hit the engine, hit the cockpit. The Zero inverted, started spinning. Hiroshi watched it fall, watched for the parachute. Saito was a good pilot. He would bail out. He had to bail out. But no parachute came. The Zero hit the jungle canopy and exploded. Hiroshi felt something break inside him, something fundamental. He turned toward the buffalo. All thought gone. Only rage. The buffalo pilot saw him coming, tried to evade, but the Zero was faster, more maneuverable. Hiroshi got inside his turn, got tone, held the trigger down until both guns were empty. The buffalo exploded. Hiroshi did not feel satisfaction, did not feel victory, felt nothing. The aftermath. They found Saito's body the next day. Japanese soldiers recovered it from the crash site. It was burned, barely recognizable. But they found his identification tags, his service ring from the University of Southern California, melted onto his finger. Hiroshi went to the crash site. The jungle was thick, hot, the smell of burnt metal and flesh. He knelt beside his friend's body. The other pilot stayed back, gave him space. It was shameful to show emotion, but Hiroshi did not care anymore. He wept. Saito should have stayed in California, should have become an engineer, should have married and had children and grown old. But he had come back to Japan, had joined the Navy, had followed Hiroshi into this war. And now he was dead at 24 years old, burned in an aircraft that could not protect him, just like the Dutch pilots, just like all of them. In Saito's pocket, they found a letter, unfinished, addressed to his sister. Hiroshi read it. The handwriting was shaky, written in a hurry, or maybe with emotion. Hiroshi says the American pilots are brave. They fly planes that cannot protect them, yet they fight anyway. I respect this. War makes enemies of those who should be brothers. I think often of my friends in California. I wonder if they think of me. I wonder. The letter ended mid-sentence. Saito had never finished it, never sent it, never had the chance. Hiroshi carefully folded the letter, put it in his jacket pocket along with the photograph of Jack Brennan. He stood over Saito's body. The Buddhist funeral rites would come later, but now he made a private vow. My friend, if I survive this war, I will find the Americans who built that plane. I will tell them that we learned from them, that you respected them, that this war was wrong. I will carry your memory to them. This I promise. San Antonio, Texas, March 1942. Jack Brennan was in his workshop when the telegram arrived. His wife, Sarah, brought it as to him. She was pale. Her hands were shaking. He knew before he opened it. The telegram was from the Curtis Wright main office, forwarded from the Dutch government in exile. Java fallen stop. CW-21 squadron destroyed. Stop 16 pilots killed in action. Stop Van Dorn captured stop. Kramer critically wounded stop. Jack read it 3 times. The words did not change. 16 pilots, dead. He had trained them, November 1940, 6 weeks at the air base in Java, teaching them to fly the CW-21, teaching them tactics, boom and zoom. Use your speed, never dogfight, never turn with a 0. But tactics only work if the aircraft can take hits, if the structure holds, if the fuel tanks do not explode from a single bullet. He walked to his workbench, found the bottle of bourbon he kept for bad days, poured a glass, drank it, poured another. Sarah watched him. Jack, it is not your fault. I trained them. I told them the plane was good. The company sent them. The war sent them. Not you. I flew it first, Sarah. I knew it was fragile. I knew the tail cracked. I knew one good hit would kill them, and I said it was fine. I said they would be safe if they flew it right. You did your job. My job killed 16 men. He drank until the bottle was half empty. Then he got in his truck and drove. Did not tell Sarah where he was going. Just drove north toward St. Louis, toward the Curtis Wright factory, toward answers that would not make him feel better. St. Louis, the next day. Daniel Garrison's office still smelled like cigarette smoke and old coffee. The man behind the desk looked older than his 52 years. The war had aged everyone. Worry about contracts, about production, about the young men dying in aircraft his company built. Jack walked in without knocking. You sent them to die. Garrison looked up. He had been expecting this. I sent them to fight. They were soldiers. It is what soldiers do. You knew about the tail cracks. You knew the plane could not take hits, and you sold it anyway. I gave them a chance, Jack. Without the CW-21, they would have had nothing. The Army rejected our design. Would you rather those Dutch boys face Zeros and Buffaloes? Or biplanes? At least the CW-21 gave them speed, gave them a fighting chance. 16 dead. That is the chance you gave them. And how many would have died with inferior aircraft 2030? All of them. Jack did not have an answer for that. He wanted to be angry, wanted to blame Garrison, but the old man was right. The alternative had been worse. Marcus Webb appeared in the doorway. He had heard the shouting. Jack, the Army evaluated our plane and rejected it because it had no armor. You know what they bought instead? Brewster Buffaloes. You know how many of those got shot down in the first month of the war? Hundreds. The CW-21 was not the problem. The problem was we did not have enough fighters. Period. Then why does it feel like we killed them? Webb was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that Jack would remember for the rest of his life. Because we did. Just like every other engineer who builds weapons. We create tools for war. Men die using them. That is the sin we carry. That is the weight we bear. And it never gets lighter. 1942 to 1945. The war years. Jack Brennan stayed with Curtis Wright, worked on training aircraft, safe designs, planes that would not kill student pilots. But the guilt followed him. Every day, every night. He drank more, slept less. His marriage suffered. His son James grew up with a father who was physically present but emotionally distant, lost somewhere in Java with the ghosts of 16 Dutch boys. Their daughter Elizabeth had been born in April 1939 while Jack was in China. She died of pneumonia in 1943, 3 years old. Sarah never spoke of her again. Jack tried once drunk on bourbon and grief, but Sarah just shook her head. Some losses you carry in silence. In 1945, the war ended. The Dutch POWs were liberated from Japanese camps. Some of them came home. Henrik van Doorn survived, returned to Holland, found his family. Peter Kramer survived his burns, spent 2 years in hospitals, eventually settled in Indonesia, never flew again. And in 1946, a letter arrived, forwarded through the Red Cross, delayed 4 years by war and chaos. The postmark was Java, February 1942. Jack opened it with shaking hands. Dear Mr. Brennan, I write this before tomorrow's mission. I know it may be my last flight. I want you to know the CW-21 is a beautiful machine. You taught us well. Some of the men blame the plane for our losses. But I do not. We asked a racehorse to plow fields. That is not the horse's fault. If I die tomorrow, please tell my parents I died flying the fastest fighter in the sky. There is honor in that. Thank you for giving us wings. Peter Kramer, 2nd Lieutenant Royal Netherlands, East Indies Air Force. Jack read the letter twice. Then he sat down at his kitchen table and cried. The first time he had cried since the telegram. His wife Sarah found him there, held him, let him grieve. He forgave me, Sarah. The boy forgave me. Then maybe you can forgive yourself. But forgiveness was not that simple, would never be that simple. The weight remained. The years passed. Jack left Curtis Wright in 1947, moved to San Antonio, opened a small aircraft repair shop. Steady work, honest work, nothing that would kill anyone. His son James grew up, enlisted in the military, became a pilot. Korea, survived, came home changed, haunted, joined the Air Force, Vietnam, and in 1970, James Brennan was shot down over Hanoi. F-4 Phantom. He was 34 years old. The funeral was on a cold day in November. Military honors, flag folded, handed to Jack. The weight of that flag was more than cloth and dye. It was the weight of every decision, every compromise, every young man sent to war in machines that might not bring them home. Jack stood at his son's grave and thought about Peter Kramer's letter, about the 16 Dutch boys, about Saito, though he did not know that name yet, about all the men who flew and died in aircraft that other men built. When does it end, he wondered. When does the killing stop? He was 64 years old. His son was dead. His career was a memory, and he thought he would never find peace. But then in September 1971, a small Japanese man knocked on his hangar door carrying a wooden box and 30 years of guilt. And everything changed, back to where we started. The bourbon bottle was half empty now. The afternoon had turned to evening. Through the hangar door, Jack could see the sky turning orange and purple. Texas sunset, the kind that makes you believe in beauty even after everything. How many did you kill? Jack asked finally. His voice was flat, not angry, not accusing, just needing to know. 3 confirmed, February and March 1942, Java. Their names? Yamada opened the wooden box. Inside were 3 sets of dog tags. Tarnished, worn, he had carried them for 29 years. Lieutenant Willem de Vries, Lieutenant Anton Jansen, Lieutenant Peter Vanderberg. Jack took the dog tags, held them. The metal was warm from being in the box, from being carried across an ocean. He read the names stamped into the metal. I remember them, he said quietly. De Vries was 22, wanted to fly commercial after the war. Jansen had a wife in Amsterdam, kept her picture in his cockpit. Vanderberg, he paused. Vanderberg was 19 years old, lied about his age to enlist early. I am deeply sorry. While you were doing your job, they were doing theirs. I built the plane. Who's really guilty here? Yamada did not answer. There was no answer. Guilt does not divide cleanly, does not assign itself to single causes. It spreads like water, touches everyone. Jack gestured toward a workbench. Sit. You came a long way. Least I can do is hear you out. They sat on metal stools, the kind that hurt after a while but you sit on anyway because there is nowhere else. Jack pulled out a bottle of bourbon from under the bench. 2 glasses that were not quite clean. Poured. To the dead, he said. To the dead, Yamada echoed. They drank. The bourbon burned going down. Good burn, clean burn, the kind that loosens tongues and lowers walls. Tell me about Java, Jack said. So Yamada told him about the briefings, about studying the intelligence photographs, about recognizing the CW-21 philosophy in the Zero design, about the first combat mission and watching the Dutch fighters climb impossibly fast, about the dogfight and how the American aircraft came apart under gunfire like paper and wind. We expected struggle, Yamada said. Expected fire and fight. But your plane just broke. One burst and the structure failed. It was terrible. I knew when I flew it. We all knew. Light structure means performance, but it also means fragility. Then why build it? Jack refilled their glasses. The bourbon caught the afternoon light, amber and gold. Because we believed speed was armor. Get above them, dive on them, hit hard and get away before they can hit you back. It works. Until it doesn't. In Zero, we had same philosophy. Lightweight, high speed, no armor. We thought this made us samurai, pure warriors trusting skill over protection. But really it just made us vulnerable. Did you lose men too? Yamada's face changed. Something broke through the careful control. My wingman, Takeshi Saito, my best friend, he was shot down during the last battle over Java. I watched him die. I'm sorry. He studied in California before the war, University of Southern California, engineering. He loved America, loved the people, the freedom, the optimism. He came back to Japan because his family called him home. And then the war came and he had no choice. Jack thought about his own son, James, who had enlisted because that was what young men did, who had died in Vietnam flying an F-4 Phantom that could not save him either. My boy died too, he said. Last year, Hanoi. He was 34. They sat with that. Two old men who had built weapons and lost sons to other men's weapons. The circle of it. The terrible mathematics. Do you hate me? Yamada asked. Jack was quiet for a long time, thinking, feeling, trying to find honesty in the tangle of emotions. No, he said finally. I hate war. I hate what it makes us do. I hate the men who start wars and send boys to die in them. But yeah, you are just another guy who did his job the best way he knew how. Same as me. I killed men you taught. And I built the plane that got them killed. And the Japanese built the Zero using lessons from my plane. We are all guilty. We are all victims. Those categories don't mean much anymore. Yamada reached into the wooden box again, pulled out a photograph. Black and white, worn at the edges. I found this in the cockpit of captured Curtiss fighter. Singapore, 1942. Jack took the photograph, recognized it immediately. Himself in China, 1939. Standing next to the CW-21 prototype, young, confident, believing he was building the future. He turned it over, read his own handwriting from 32 years ago. To the brave pilots of the CW-21, fly fast, fly high. I gave this to the Dutch squadron, he said, before I left Java. I thought it would inspire them. It did. The pilot who had it kept it in his cockpit, even after he knew the plane was fragile, even after friends died. He kept flying because you told him to fly fast and fly high. Jack felt something break loose inside. Grief he had been carrying since 1942. Since the telegram. Since Peter Kramer's letter. Since his son's funeral. I got them killed, he said. You pulled the trigger, but I got them killed. No, we both got them killed. And the generals who started the war, and the politicians who let it happen, and the engineers who designed weapons, and the parents who raised boys to be soldiers. Everyone is guilty. Everyone carries weight. They finished the bourbon in silence. Why did you come here? Jack asked. After 30 years. Why now? Yamada set down his glass. Because I am 58 years old. Because my wife died last year. Because my children are grown. Because I teach now. Young students who were born after the war. They know nothing of what we did, what we carried. And I realized I cannot die with this weight. Cannot leave it for them to find after I am gone. I must put it down. Give it to someone who understands. So you brought it to me. You are the only one who can receive it. You built the plane, trained the pilots, carry the same guilt. Only you understand. Jack stood up, walked to the hangar door, looked out at the Texas afternoon. Heat shimmer on the concrete, a hawk circling high and lazy. You can stay at my place, he said. Guest room's small, but it's clean. We'll figure this out. Together. Yamada bowed, deep, the kind of bow that meant gratitude beyond words. 3 days in Texas. The first day, Jack took Yamada to a barbecue place on the south side of San Antonio. The kind of place with picnic tables outside and smoke rising in from a brick pit that had been burning for 40 years. The owner was a veteran, Korea. He looked at Yamada hard when they walked in, then looked at Jack. "He's with me, Carl. We flew different sides, but same war." Carl studied them both, then nodded. "Brisket's good today. So's the pork." They ordered brisket, ribs, sausage, beans, and coleslaw. Sweet tea so cold it made your teeth hurt. Sat outside at a table under a live oak tree. Yamada had never tasted Texas barbecue. The first bite made his eyes widen. "This is, well, very good. Best in the state, maybe the country." They ate in silence for a while. The food was simple, honest, the kind of meal that requires attention and respect. Yamada ate slowly, carefully, appreciating each flavor. "In Japan," he said, "we say good food shared is grief divided." That's a good saying. Your country has good sayings too. I studied some. Breaking bread together. That means peace, yes. Yeah, means you're not enemies anymore. They ate until the plates were clean, until the sun dropped lower and the heat eased and the hawk stopped circling. On the way back to the truck, Yamada stopped, looked at Jack. "Thank you for this, for not hating me. Thank you for coming, for carrying those dog tags all these years, for caring enough to find me." The second day, they worked together in Jack's workshop. A Cessna needed an oil change. Spark plugs replaced. Basic maintenance, the kind of work that lets men talk without having to look at each other. Yamada proved to be skilled with tools. His hands were steady, careful. He had worked on aircraft engines before. Zeros, maintenance in the field, keeping planes flying with improvised parts and determination. "You could have been a good mechanic," Jack said. "I became teacher instead, engineering, at technical school in Osaka. Teaching the next generation." "Yes, trying to. They do not understand war, cannot imagine it. I tell them about the zero, about the Curtis, about the choice between protection and performance. They think it is academic. Numbers and equations. They do not know it is also blood." Jack tightened a bolt, wiped his hands on a rag. "Maybe that's better. Maybe they should think it's just numbers. Let them build in peace." "Perhaps. But then they forget that every design choice has consequences." They finished the oil change, tested the engine. It ran smooth, clean, the kind of satisfaction that comes from honest work done well. "You know," Jack said, "if we had met in 1938, we would have been friends." "Yes, I think so. We are friends now, better late than never." Yamada smiled. It was the first time Jack had seen him smile. It changed his face, made him look younger, less burdened. The third day, Jack took Yamada to the cemetery. It was outside San Antonio. Old cemetery, live oaks and headstones and grass kept neat by veterans who volunteered their time. Jack's son was buried in the military section. Rows of white markers, all exactly the same. They stood at James Brennan's grave. The headstone was simple. Name, rank, dates. Nothing that captured who he was, what he loved, what he lost. "He was a good pilot," Jack said. "Better than me, more careful, more disciplined, but it didn't matter. F-4 Phantom got hit by a SAM over Hanoi. He ejected, but the parachute failed. Or maybe he was already dead. They never found the body." Yamada bowed to the grave, Japanese style. Then he pulled something from his pocket, a small object wrapped in cloth. This was Saito's, his university ring, from California. "I have carried it since 1942. I would like to leave it here, with your son, so they can be brothers in the earth." Jack felt his throat tighten, nodded. Yamada knelt, dug a small hole next to the headstone with his hands, placed the ring carefully, covered it with soil, pressed it down. Then he said a Buddhist prayer. Words Jack did not understand, but felt anyway. The rhythm of grief, the cadence of letting go. When he finished, Jack said the Lord's Prayer, Christian words over a Buddhist offering over American earth. All of it mixed together, all of it meaning the same thing. We remember, We honor. We release. They stood together in the Texas heat and let the dead rest. September 15th, 1971. The final ritual. Jack drove Yamada to a remote airstrip 40 miles outside San Antonio. Old field, abandoned. Cracked concrete runway and weeds growing through. Nobody used it anymore. In the truck bed, Jack had the piece of aluminum from the crashed CW-21, the piece Yamada had carried from Singapore. "What are we doing here?" Yamada asked. "Saying goodbye." They built a small fire. Safe, controlled, metal drum with kindling and mesquite wood. The smoke rose straight up in the still air. Jack placed the aluminum in the flames. It did not melt. Aluminum requires higher temperature, but it blackened, warped, changed. Yamada placed Saito's letter in the fire, the unfinished letter to his sister. Watched it curl and burn and become ash. "These things we carried," Jack said. "The guilt, the grief, the weight of men who died, we put them down now. Can we do that? Can we simply decide to be free? I don't know, but we can try." They watched the fire burn, watched the smoke rise, and something did feel lighter. Not gone. The weight would never be completely gone, but shared now, divided between two men who understood. When the fire died, they buried the remains, aluminum and ash together, marked it with stones in a pattern that meant nothing to anyone but them. Then they shook hands. "Brother," Jack said. "Brother," Yamada answered. The years after, 1971 to 1985. They wrote letters, once a month at first, then more often. Jack's handwriting was rough, engineer's script, all capitals and straight lines. Yamada's was careful, each letter formed with precision. The letters started formal, updates about weather and work and small things. But over time they deepened. Jack wrote about his marriage, how it had struggled during the war years, how Sarah had stayed anyway, how she was his anchor. Yamada wrote about teaching, about his students who could not imagine war, about trying to pass on lessons without passing on trauma. In 1975, Yamada visited Texas again, brought his daughter, 20 years old, studying medicine. She met Jack's grandchildren. They played together. Language barrier meant nothing to children. Sarah made dinner, pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans, American comfort food. Yamada's daughter tried everything, polite, curious. After dinner, Yamada helped with dishes. The women laughed at the two old men arguing about the right way to dry glasses. "Your father is a good man," Sarah told Yamada's daughter. "So is yours," the daughter answered. In 1982, Jack visited Japan, his first time. Yamada met him at the airport in Osaka, took him to temples in Kyoto, gardens so perfect they looked like paintings, tea ceremonies where every gesture meant something. They visited Saito's family grave, rural cemetery outside Osaka, Buddhist markers and incense. Yamada introduced Jack as his American brother. Saito's sister was there. Old now, gray hair. She bowed to Jack. "Thank you for honoring my brother. He was a good man. He should be remembered." She gave Jack a photograph. Saito at USC, young, smiling, wearing a Trojan sweatshirt, looking like any American college student. Jack kept that photograph, put it next to the one of himself in China with the CW-21. Two young men, different countries, same dreams, same fate in the end. 1985. The museum, the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio, announced they had restored the only surviving CW-21, the aircraft captured by the Japanese in 1942, found by British forces in Singapore in 1945, stored for decades, finally restored. They invited Jack to the unveiling, invited Yamada too when they learned the connection. The two old men flew to Ohio together. Jack was 79. Yamada was 72. Both walked with canes now. Both moved slower. But their minds were sharp. The ceremony was formal. Museum director gave a speech about the CW-21, called it one of aviation's great what-ifs, talked about how it might have changed the war if the Army had adopted it. Jack and Yamada sat in the front row, listening, not speaking. When the speech ended, the crowd mingled. Reporters wanted interviews. Why was a Japanese ace at an American military museum? Why were he and the designer friendly? A young airman approached, nervous, maybe 25 years old. "Excuse me, sirs, did you both fly in the war?" "I built planes," Jack said. "I flew them," Yamada said. "Against each other." "Yes." The airman looked confused. "Then why are you friends?" Jack smiled. "Sun war ends. Friendship doesn't have to." The airman thought about that, then saluted. They returned it. Old reflexes. After the ceremony, they walked around the CW-21 together. The restoration was perfect. Better than the original. Every rivet, every panel, every detail exact. Yamada pointed to design features that had influenced the Zero. The wing shape, the engine cowling, the landing gear mechanism. Jack explained the compromises. The choices between weight and strength, speed and protection, performance and safety. "We were right," Yamada said, "about the philosophy. Light fighters dominated early war. Spitfire, Mustang, Zero, all followed same principle." "We were right but also wrong," Jack answered. "Right about performance. Wrong about protection. The planes that won the war had both. We were just too early, too pure in our thinking." They stood before the aircraft they had both served, both killed with, both survived. "It is beautiful," Yamada said. "Yes, and deadly, and tragic, all at once." They stood there for a long time, two old men before a machine that had defined their lives. A museum guard approached, ready to close for the evening. "Sirs, we're closing in 10 minutes. Jack nodded, started to turn away, but Yamada stayed, reached out, touched the aluminum skin one more time. So thin, so light, so deadly. "Goodbye, old demon," he whispered in Japanese. Jack understood without translation. He placed his hand on the aircraft too, his fingers next to Yamada's. American and Japanese, builder and destroyer, enemies and brothers. "Goodbye," Jack echoed. They walked out of the museum together into the Ohio evening. Behind them, the CW-21 sat in its climate-controlled display. Perfect, preserved, silent, waiting for the next generation to learn its lessons. 1997, the last meeting. Jack was 91, wheelchair-bound, hands that shook. Yamada was 84, walking with two canes, breathing hard. Yamada had flown from Japan one last time. He knew it was the last time. His health was failing. The trip took everything he had. They sat in Jack's workshop, surrounded by tools and half-finished projects and the smell of oil and metal. The same smell from 60 years ago, from St. Louis and Java and all the places between. "Do you have regrets?" Yamada asked. "Millions, but not you. Meeting you was a gift." "For me too. You gave me forgiveness I did not deserve." "We both deserved it. We both needed it. Sometimes that's the same thing." Yamada pulled out an old leather journal, worn, stained, held together with string. "My war diary. Every mission, every kill, including your students. I want you to have it." "Why, hey?" "Because when I die, I want someone who understands to remember. Oh, yeah, remember. Not with hate, with compassion." Well, Jack took the journal. His hands were too shaky to hold it steady, but he managed. "I will keep it. I will tell people our story so they know enemies can become brothers." "Thank you." They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes from decades of friendship, of shared weight, of understanding that goes beyond words. "Jack, yeah, I am glad I found you. Glad I came to Texas that day." "Me too, Hiroshi. Me too." The ending. Jack Brennan died on February 14th, 1999. He was 93 years old. Heart failure. Peaceful. Sarah was holding his hand. His grandchildren were there. His last words were unclear. Mumbled. But Sarah thought she heard, "Tell Hiroshi, I will see him on the other side." She wrote to Yamada, sent the letter to Osaka. It arrived 3 weeks later. Hiroshi Yamada died on March 3rd, 2001, exactly 59 years after the last battle over Java. He was 88 years old. Pneumonia, his daughter was with him. They found two objects in his bedside table, his Zero pilot wings, and the photograph of Jack Brennan standing next to the CW-21 in China, 1939. Both wrapped carefully in silk. His daughter wrote to Sarah Brennan, told her about the photograph, about how her father had carried it for 62 years. Sarah cried when she read the letter, but they were good tears. Tears of completion, of circles closing, of weight finally lifted. The legacy, the restored CW-21 sits in the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio. Visitors walk past it, read the plaque, learn about specifications and combat history and the battles over Java. But there is another plaque now, smaller, added in 2002. It reads, "In memory of the pilots who flew the CW-21 in combat and the men who faced them in battle. May their sacrifice remind us that even in war, humanity endures." Dedicated to Jack Brennan, 1906 to 1999, designer and teacher, and Hiroshi Yamada, 1913 to 2001, pilot and peacemaker. Former enemies, lifelong friends, school groups visit, veterans visit, aviation enthusiasts visit. They see a beautiful aircraft. They see engineering excellence. They see a piece of history, but some see more. Some see the story behind the machine. The men who built it and flew it and killed with it and were killed by it. The weight they carried, the forgiveness they found, the bridge they built across hatred and war. The CW-21 never entered American military service. Only 24 fought in combat. Most were destroyed. The design was abandoned, the program forgotten. But it gave the world something more valuable than military victories. It proved that men who create weapons and men who use weapons can find common ground. That enemies can become brothers. That guilt can be shared and forgiveness can be found and weight can be set down. The Zero and the CW-21 were born from the same philosophy. Speed through lightness, victory through daring. They fought each other in the skies over Java. They killed good men on both sides. And in the end, they brought two warriors together in Texas heat and bourbon and barbecue and honest work. Brought them together in a friendship that lasted 26 years. Until death took them both and they went to whatever comes next, carrying lighter burdens than they had carried before. This is the story of the Curtiss Wright CW-21, the demon that never was. The fighter that failed in war but succeeded in peace. The machine that killed men and then decades later helped heal the men who survived. War ends, but the stories remain. And some stories teach us that even from the wreckage of conflict, from the ashes of hatred, from the weight of guilt that seems too heavy to bear, redemption is possible. All it takes is two old men brave enough to face each other, to speak truth, to share weight, to forgive. In another life, Jack Brennan and Hiroshi Yamada might have been friends from the start, might have built aircraft together, might have changed the world together. In this life, they were enemies first, killers, men who carried the deaths of young pilots who trusted them. But they became friends anyway, and that in the end might be worth more than all the victories and defeats of war combined. The CW-21 sits in its museum, silent, beautiful, waiting for someone to understand, to see beyond the aluminum and rivets, to see the human story. And when the lights go down and the museum closes and the visitors go home, maybe the ghosts gather. Maybe Willem de Vries and Anton Johnson and Peter Vanderberg stand beside Takeshi Saito and James Brennan. Maybe they watch the old fighter together. No longer enemies, no longer divided by nations or causes or the things that made them fight. Just pilots, just men, just souls who flew too fast and died too young and are remembered by the men who survived them. This is how wars should end, not with victory or defeat, but with understanding, with forgiveness, with two old men sitting in a Texas workshop sharing bourbon and grief, and finally, after all those years, peace, the demon and the samurai, the builder and the destroyer, the guilty and the forgiven, brothers.